A band of humans crests a windswept ridge, staring down at a valley no human eye has ever seen. Below them stretches endless savanna, golden grass rippling toward a horizon that seems to have no end. They carry stone spears, hide bundles, and hungry children, and behind them lies everything they have ever known. Something in their blood pulls them forward, past the last familiar hill, into the unknown wild. This restless urge would carry their descendants across oceans, glaciers, and deserts to every corner of the earth. If the horizon pulls at you the way it pulled at them, subscribe and journey with us across the ancient world. Our story begins in Africa, cradle of humankind, where the first true humans watched the same red sunsets. On the East African savanna, small bands hunted antelope and gathered roots beneath scattered acacia trees. Firelight flickered each night as they huddled together, sharing meat and stories under a blaze of stars. They knew every waterhole, every animal track, every edible seed within their sun-scorched homeland. But the climate was turning cruel, and the rains that fed the grasslands began to fail. Rivers shrank to muddy trickles, the herds thinned, and the savanna cracked into dust beneath their feet. Hunger sharpened their eyes toward the distant hills, where fresh green might still be waiting. So the bands began to drift, following the migrating herds across the drying African plains. Each generation pushed a little farther, tracking gazelle and buffalo toward unclaimed grazing lands. They read the sky like a map, watching clouds, birds, and the drift of dust on the wind. Around their campfires, elders pointed north, toward rumors of rivers that never ran dry. By day they crossed shimmering plains, by night they slept in circles, spears aimed outward at the dark. Lions and hyenas shadowed them, testing the edges of the firelight, waiting for a straggler to fall. Yet the humans pressed on, their footprints pressing fresh into the soft mud of vanished lakes. Slowly the savanna gave way to harsher country, thorn scrub and stony ground stretching toward the sea. Ahead lay the narrow gateway out of Africa, where two continents nearly touch across shining water. At the mouth of the Red Sea, low tides exposed sandbars glittering with stranded shells and fish. Here the boldest bands waded the shallows, crossing from Africa into the vast unknown of Arabia. Behind them, the continent of their birth faded into haze, never to be their home again. Before them opened a new world of red dunes, rocky ridges, and blistering desert silence. Water became everything, and they moved from oasis to oasis, chasing the memory of green. They learned to find hidden springs beneath dry riverbeds, digging into cool sand with bare hands. Under the merciless Arabian sun, they draped themselves in loose hides to shield burning skin. At dusk, they walked, guided by the first bright stars rising over the endless desert. The desert tested them, but between the dunes lay green corridors carved by ancient monsoon rains. Along these grassy corridors flowed rivers alive with fish, birds, and grazing wild cattle. The bands feasted on the banks, growing strong enough to push deeper toward the rising sun. They reached the great valleys of the Middle East, where fertile rivers curled through golden plains. Reeds towered along the water, hiding nests of eggs in the tracks of waiting beasts. Here humans thrived, spearing fish in the shallows and snaring waterfowl among the rushes. But the wandering spirit would not rest, and the eastern horizon still whispered of untouched land. So the bands split, some turning north toward cold mountains, others east along warm coasts. The coastal wanderers followed the shoreline, prying shellfish from rocks pounded by turquoise surf. Each beach offered fresh bounty, and the sea became a moving highway leading ever eastward. They crossed river mouths on driftwood, wading estuaries where crocodiles lurked beneath still water. Generation by generation, footprints marched along thousands of miles of Asian coastline. Inland dense forests rose green and dripping, alive with strange birds and unseen movement. The jungle bands learned its dangers, dodging pythons and reading the calls of hidden monkeys. Beneath the towering canopy, they gathered fruit, tubers, and honey dripping from wild bees. Sunlight fell in golden shafts through the leaves as they wove shelters from bamboo and vine. The forest hid giant creatures too, including the towering ape Gigantopithecus deep in the hills. Humans spread across the whole of southern Asia, from steaming jungle to wind-blown coast. Wherever they went, they adapted, changing their tools, their clothing, and their way of the hunt. At last, the coastal wanderers reached a shore where the land simply stopped at open ocean. Beyond the breaking waves lay only water, stretching blue and empty to the far horizon. Yet on the clearest days, faint blue shapes hovered at the edge of the sea. Distant islands, half dream and half promise, beckoned across the impossible water. No human had ever crossed such open sea, but these people would dare the unknown. They lashed bamboo and logs together with vines, building the first crude rafts on the sand. Waves battered the fragile crafts as families climbed aboard with children and precious fire. They pushed off from the beach, paddling into swells that lifted them toward the empty horizon. Behind them the coastline sank away, and before them stretched nothing but heaving open ocean. By day they watched the drift of clouds, by night they steered by the wheeling stars. Some rafts were swallowed by the sea, lost forever beneath the indifferent, rolling waves. But others rode the currents onward, spray stinging their eyes as green land finally appeared. They dragged their rafts onto a strange shore, the first humans ever to reach Australia. This ancient continent, Sahul, held creatures unlike anything they had ever seen before. Giant kangaroos twice a man's height bounded across the red outback beneath a huge, hard sky. A marsupial lion, muscular and sharp-clawed, stalked the eucalyptus groves in deadly silence. Wombats the size of bears, called diprotodon, grazed the scrub in slow lumbering herds. The newcomers hunted these beasts with fire and spear, learning the rhythms of a new world. They set the dry bush ablaze to drive game, reshaping the land with sweeping walls of flame. Across deserts, coasts, and gorges, they spread until the whole vast continent was theirs. On rock walls they painted their prey in ochre, leaving the oldest art beneath the sun. Meanwhile, far to the north, other bands were turning toward a colder, crueler frontier. The Ice Age gripped the world, and glaciers crept south, locking the seas into towering walls of ice. These humans faced biting winds and frozen nights unlike anything their ancestors had known. To survive, they became masters of hide and bone, sewing the first fitted winter clothing. With needles carved from splinters, they stitched fur parkas, snug boots, and warm hoods. Wrapped in layered furs, they walked into a frozen realm no tropical hunter could endure. They pushed onto the Mammoth Steppe, a vast grassland of frost stretching across northern Asia. Here roamed the woolly mammoth, tusks curling like great scythes above the wind-scoured snow. Alongside them grazed woolly rhinos, wild horses, and shaggy bison in enormous frozen herds. Humans hunted the mammoth in daring bands, driving the giants toward cliffs and hidden pits. A single kill fed a whole clan for weeks and gave bones for shelters against the wind. They built domed huts from curved mammoth tusks and hides, glowing warm against the Arctic dark. Fire became sacred, carried carefully from camp to camp across the frozen, treeless plain. Predators prowled the ice too, including the cave lion and the hulking, hungry cave bear. In deep caverns, humans and cave bears clashed over shelter from the killing cold. Yet the ice hunters endured, following the great herds ever eastward across Siberia's white expanse. They reached the very edge of Asia, where frozen tundra met a sea choked with drifting ice. But the Ice Age held a secret, for the falling oceans had bared a hidden bridge of land. So much water lay locked in glaciers that the seabed rose, exposing a plain between the continents. This was Beringia, a windswept land bridge joining Asia to a world no human had ever touched. 1,000 miles wide, it was no mere crossing but a cold homeland of grass and marsh. Mammoths and bison grazed there, drawing the hunters step by frozen step across the bridge. For generations, bands lived on Beringia, unaware they stood between two entire worlds. Icy winds screamed across the tundra as they followed the herds into the deepening east. Then at last they crossed the far shore and set foot on the empty Americas. Two whole continents, untouched by any human hand, opened before their astonished eyes. But towering glaciers barred the way south, walls of blue ice miles thick and utterly silent. The first Americans waited at the frozen gate, trapped between the ice and the cold northern sea. Some pushed south along the coast, paddling past cliffs of ice in small skin boats. They hugged the shoreline, harvesting seals, fish, and kelp beneath the shadow of the glaciers. Others waited until a corridor melted open between the two great retreating ice sheets. Through this narrow passage of thawing mud and grass, they marched into the heart of a new world. Beyond the ice lay a paradise of plains teeming with game that had never feared a hunter. Columbian mammoths, larger than their woolly cousins, grazed the golden North American grasslands. Giant ground sloths, tall as trees, reared up to strip leaves from ancient forest boughs. Herds of camels and wild horses thundered across valleys beneath snow-capped western peaks. The saber-toothed cat lurked in the brush, dagger fangs gleaming as it stalked the vast herds. Dire wolves hunted in packs, and short-faced bears towered over every predator on the plain. Into this wild kingdom the humans spread, crafting deadly stone spear points razor-sharp. With fluted blades lashed to shafts, they brought down mammoths at rivers and muddy watering holes. Around their kills they camped, butchering the giants and drying meat over crackling open fires. Faster than any migration before, they swept across the continent from icy north to warm south. They crossed rolling prairies, following bison herds so vast they darkened the horizon. They entered eastern woodlands, hunting deer between towering oaks and glowing autumn leaves. They pushed into scorching southwestern deserts, learning to survive on cactus, seed, and shade. In the desert, they read the land for hidden water and tracked bighorn across Red Canyon walls. Ever southward they marched, over highlands and through the narrow neck joining the Americas. They plunged into steaming tropical jungle, where jaguars watched from the dripping green canopy. Amid the rainforest they gathered fruit and speared fish in rivers thick with silver shoals. Beyond the jungle rose the Andes, the mightiest mountains they had ever dared to climb. Up they went into thin, freezing air, where snowfields glittered above the drifting clouds. Their bodies adapted, chests broadening to breed the mountain heights that would fell a lowlander. They hunted vicuña across high grassy plateaus beneath jagged, ice-crowned volcanic peaks. Still they journeyed, descending toward the cold, windswept plains of the far southern grasslands. They faced giant ground sloths and armored glyptodonts as big as small cars on the Patagonian steppe. At last they reached the very end of the land, where storms crash on the world's final shore. Here, at the tip of South America, they lit fires against the freezing wind and endless sea. From this coast of Tierra del Fuego, there was simply nowhere left on Earth to walk. In only a few thousand years, humans had spread from Africa to the ends of the Americas. No creature had ever conquered so many worlds, from burning desert to frozen sea. The secret of that conquest was not strength, but the power to adapt to anything. In the tundra, they wore thick furs. In the jungle, almost nothing but woven leaves. On the coast, they built rafts. On the steppe, they raised huts of mammoth bone. They changed their tools for every prey, from tiny fish hooks to massive mammoth spears. Fire traveled with them everywhere, warming ice camps and clearing dense forest paths alike. They read the stars over deserts and oceans, navigating worlds their ancestors never imagined. They learned which plants healed and which killed, passing that wisdom down through firelit nights. And everywhere they walked, the great beasts of the old world began to vanish behind them. The mammoth, the giant sloth, the marsupial lion, all faded from the changing land. Whether by human spears or shifting climate, an age of giants was drawing to its close. The frozen mammoth steppe thawed into forest and swamp as the great glaciers melted away. Rising seas swallowed Beringia, drowning the bridge that had joined the continents together. The land route to the Americas vanished beneath the cold gray waters of the Bering Strait. Now the scattered bands were sealed onto their new continents, each world a home unto itself. Across every landscape, humanity had planted its firelit camps beneath 1,000 different skies. From African savanna to Australian outback, from Siberian ice to Andean peak, we had arrived. Every band carried the same restless fire that had first driven them over that distant ridge. Think of the courage it took to paddle a raft into an ocean with no shore in sight. Think of the endurance to march for generations across ice with children on your back. These were ordinary people, no stronger than us, yet they claimed a wild and endless world. They had no maps, no metal, no promise that any land lay beyond the far horizon. They had only their feet, their fire, their spears, and an unbreakable will to go on. Along the way, they left their footprints in ancient mud, preserved for us to find today. In coastal caves and desert cliffs, they painted the animals and journeys of their lives. Those handprints on stone reach across the ages, ancestors waving to us from deep time. Every person alive today descends from those small, brave bands who dared to keep walking. Their blood runs in the desert nomad, the Arctic hunter, the mountain herder, and in you. The whole human family is one long chain of footprints stretching back to that African dawn. From one restless valley, we grew to fill deserts, jungles, tundras, islands, and coasts. We became the only creature at home on every continent, under every kind of sky. Picture the first band gazing across a strange new valley, torchlight glinting in their eyes. Multiply that single moment across 10,000 valleys and 40,000 years of walking. That is the Great Migration, the slow and stubborn conquest of a whole planet on foot. Each step was a gamble, each new shore a leap of faith into total darkness. And with every gamble won, the human map of the world grew wider by another horizon. They crossed frozen straits where the wind could freeze a breath into ice midair. They forded rivers swollen with meltwater, holding torches high above the churning current. They climbed passes where the air grew thin, and the peaks vanished into swirling snow. They pushed through jungles so thick that the sun barely reached the tangled forest floor. And still, night after night, the campfires bloomed across an ever-widening world. Around those fires, they told the young of the lands their grandparents had left behind. Stories of distant savannas and swallowed bridges became the first great human legends. Their memory of the journey lived on in song long after the trails themselves had faded. By firelight, they carved the first tallies, counting seasons, herds, and days of travel. They had become storytellers, artists, navigators, and survivors of every harsh frontier. In the desert, they danced for rain. On the coast, they thanked the generous, dangerous sea. Everywhere, they bound themselves together with ritual, kinship, and the shared warmth of fire. That bond of the band, forged on the long march, is the root of every human society. We are, at heart, a wandering species that learned to make any wilderness a home. But even the boldest wanderers would one day grow weary of the endless open road. After tens of thousands of years of walking, the world at last began to fill with people. The great empty valleys now held rival bands, their campfires glowing across the same plains. With nowhere left to wander, humans began to look at the land in a wholly new way. Instead of chasing the herds, they wondered if the herds could be kept close to camp. Instead of gathering wild grain, they wondered if the seeds could be planted by their own hands. By fertile rivers where reeds swayed thick, the wanderers began, at last, to stay. The age of endless walking was ending, and a new age of settlement was about to dawn. The footprints that had crossed a planet would soon circle back to a single patch of soil. From those first riverside camps, the first villages and fields would slowly take root. The greatest journey in human history had carried us to the very threshold of civilization. We had conquered the earth with our feet, and now we would begin to reshape it with our hands. Beside a quiet river, a woman presses a seed into the dark earth, and the world changes forever. The wandering fire that drove us from Africa now burns steady in a single settled hearth. And so the Great Migration paused, its restless children finally choosing a place to belong. That choice made by a river long ago would grow into the first towns, temples, and kingdoms. If this journey across a frozen, sunlit, storm-tossed world moved you, drop a like to help others find it. Which crossing amazed you most? The ocean raft to Australia, or the icy bridge into the Americas? Tell us in the comments. Subscribe now so you never miss a chapter of the incredible story written in our ancestors' footprints. Next time, we follow those first settlers beside the river as farming and the earliest villages are born. From wandering bands to walled towns, the dawn of civilization awaits, so journey on with us into the next great age.